Hello, hello, and welcome to Chartless. I don't have a theme song written yet, so that's what you get. You get my little vibrato laden intro. I'm Melissa Mulligan. I am here with my friend, colleague, mentor at times, renowned therapist, Dr. Alaina Johnson, who is also the author of a book we all need. It's called Parenting Talent, The Grown-Up's Guide to Understanding and Supporting Creatively Driven Teens and Tweens. And I always tell people, I don't care how old you are, read it. You will learn how to parent yourself as a creative person navigating the world. I go back to this resource whether I need to understand myself or my clients or my students, or sometimes my clients and students' parents and what they are going through. So welcome, Dr. Alaina. Thank you for being here today.
Well, Mel, I absolutely love speaking with you. So thank you so much for having me.
One of the key topics for the artists I work with this year is how do we show up as our best selves? And I don't mean being a good person, although I know we all tend to have inner conversations with ourselves about that too. But as a creative professional or an aspiring professional, especially in music, we have a lot we need to do in any given season, right? We have to write great music, learn how to produce ourselves, and or maybe even get better at mixing. We need to perform and show up. And then we're told you need to have a brand, you need to have an aesthetic, you must be on social media, you have to figure out how you're going to make a living. There's all of these things. You got to network, you got to get out there, all these you gottas, right? Just on our phones, nonstop. How do we balance it all? Being creative, being productive, our mental health, protecting our peace. Like how? How do we do it? Alaina, help us
You like to
figure
start
it
with
out.
those really simple questions.
It's we're not we're gonna have to get into the weeds because I'm sure it's different for everyone. But can you at least maybe we should just start by normalizing that this is the big question that so many of us are facing.
Yes, of course, you're asking from the bent of musicians and those in the creative arts, but we all face this. This is a constant thing that we have to try to navigate is how do we stay grounded? How do we identify who we are as individuals? How do we focus on the things we need to focus on while at the same time getting through life in a way that makes us feel happy and whole and organized and not overwhelmed? And it's a lot. It's a lot. And I do think that, musicians are a great example, but I think this is true for, creatives is that exactly what you're saying. There's so many different parts. The first thing I say to them is, you are going to be an entrepreneur. Are you prepared for that? I know in your mind, you just want to sing and you want to make music and you want to make people happy in doing so. And a lot of times, especially when you're dealing with younger people and young adults, they may not be as tuned into the fact that they're going to be an entrepreneur. And that may not be what they're signed up for in their mind. Like, that's not what I wanted to do. That's not. So now you're giving me this list of things and you want me to show up as my best self to every one of these things. And I think one of the things I really try to focus on when people are coming to me with that sense of overwhelm and, I just feel like I'm like at 50% at everything and therefore nothing is coming together because nothing's getting my full attention the way it needs to, is to look at what is getting in the way of showing up as your best self in each individual area. Because in that list you gave me, like you said, it's going to be very unique to every different person. It's going to be different for each person why they're not showing up as their best selves. So why am I not showing up as my best self when it comes to social media? It could be as pure and genuinely simple as I just don't like it. I don't particularly enjoy consuming it. I have no real interest in it. Yeah, I kind of understand it, but I find it boring. And you may have another person who's coming at it saying, I actually love social media. I just legit have no idea what to say. I have no idea what to do.
Right.
Then you get someone who says, I don't know how to show up when I'm not singing. I don't know how to do anything other than that. So there's all these different things that I say, let's not get overwhelmed. Let's look at each individual area of your life and what is it within that area that might be getting in the way. And Sometimes the big thing that's getting in the way, and I'm sure at some point we will talk about this more in depth today, is fear. There's a fear of failing. And when you're paralyzed by that fear of failure or fear of not meeting the success you want, you can kind of get paralyzed and not do the things you need to do. And of course, if you're not doing the things you need to do, you're just not showing up as your best self.
Yeah. So this touches upon something that I hear all the time from artists I work with, which is, logically, I know that this thing is important for me to do, right? Like learning this new production skill or developing my EPK or posting this thing to social media, if you want to stick on that. Like logically, I know that this is something I'm supposed to do, but I can't bring myself to do it. Now, a tactic that I often take in coaching is to question, is that something you actually need to do? You've been told social media is important, but that's super vague and overwhelming feeling. Is it something we need to be worrying about right now, or can we take it off your plate? That often is like a broad brush way that I find to help people get rid of overwhelm, is to actually question all of the things that they're hanging on to. But there are certainly moments where we know it's important, we know how to do it, and the motivation isn't there. And maybe there's even an emotional block. Is it always fear, or can it be other reasons why? Should we do it anyway, even though we're not feeling motivated, or should we unpack that, I think is the question.
I do think there's a great power in just moving forward, but that's hard to do because just moving forward, again, you can get stuck because if you're just moving forward and you don't feel like you understand it or you're good at it or what you're putting out there feels right or comfortable, again, then you find yourself getting stuck. And it's like, you're slogging through a mud pit. And that's really how it feels to some people is I can't see what's coming in front of me. And it doesn't matter how hard I fight against this. It feels like it just keeps overwhelming me and I don't understand. And they get really stuck in that moment. So it's not just fear. And I would say it's not just a lack of motivation. You can be very motivated to do something and not be able to still get yourself over that hump and get some momentum going and try. And what I often see is that when that's happening, I will come back and say, so let's say everything goes right. Let's say that you get over this. Let's say you figure out how to work in your DAW and you're doing it. What do you think is going to happen? And what I find is that a lot of times there's a lot of these unconscious or even conscious thoughts of, even if I do it, once I master that, what I actually am able to come up with and produce from that isn't going to be that good. So there is some fear. There's some fear of failure. There's some fear of being judged. If I actually do it, it's for many people, it's easier to procrastinate, make a bunch of excuses and not do it than face the reality of, if I do this, is it really going to get me what I want? Because if it doesn't, that brings up so many different things. That brings up, should I even be in this? Am I going to be capable? What does this look like? So I know, thank goodness, someone like you is going to say to them, I'm not asking you to become a professional producer producing other people. I'm asking you to get to this level. And sometimes just understanding that what you're thinking this has to be isn't what something really has to be. We just need you to know a certain amount. You just have to get to a certain place. And it's okay if you're not the best or the greatest or whatever that term is in your mind that says this is the stamp of approval I'm going to give myself and I'm going to feel good about it. It's just we need you to have a certain proficiency at this, and that's okay. I say the same thing with social media. Let's take out the idea of focusing on the numbers. Just learn the skill. Don't worry about how many followers you get. Don't worry about how many likes you get. I get it. The whole thing is designed to make you feel a way when those things happen. But if you can disconnect from that, if you can just say, this is 10 minutes of my day, I'm doing 10 minutes, I'm putting it up, and I'm not looking at my own account, I'm not paying attention to that for the rest of the day, that can help move past it. So motivation isn't always the thing that's stopping someone. It's, why are you sabotaging your motivation? Why are you stepping out of the way of that motivation? What is going on internally that is really making everything feel so overwhelming?
Yeah, I love that. I think I find with artists, some of the musicians that I work with really need that big picture to be complete before they can take a step. And it sounds like sort of what you're talking about. Like, hey, you don't need to worry about social media right now because we're not yet, you're just figuring out who you are and you're not yet releasing music. And you really don't need to be worried about that. And like, yeah, but I can't stop worrying about it because in order for me to feel excited about making this music and learning these skills and producing an EP or whatever, I need to also be excited about what comes next, not be terrified or shut down about the unknown of what comes next. So I need to see my whole roadmap, and then you have my buy-in, and then I can start making progress. Whereas others, when I try and get them to link it all to the big picture, I can just feel their energy shutting down of like, all I can think about right now is just, I just want to write this song. Please don't make me link it to 10 steps away from right now.
And there's another branch of this that we haven't covered, which is there's also some people who are coming from a place of, if I do this and I do it well and I feel good about what I put out there, is it going to be accepted? Is it actually going to do what I want it to do? Are people going to be excited about what I put out there? If I don't put anything out there, there's nothing out there for anyone to judge. So it's really easy to find all sorts of excuses to not move forward because that dream up close can be really scary.
Yes. And I work with an artist who's like, I don't care if everyone else likes it. If I hate it and I have to live with it for the rest of my life, I may as well not do this. So are those different types of perfectionistic tendencies, sort of fearing the external critics and the internal criticism, would you say?
Yes, perfectionism is something that a lot of us struggle with. It's very fascinating to me how often I work with, especially teens who actually are very perfectionistic, but they don't identify that as part of themselves at all. But when I break down what perfectionism actually is and how it might be hindering what they're doing, they go, see, I thought I was just lazy, or I thought I was just bad at that. But actually, it's because I care so deeply about the outcome and how the outcome is received that I'm getting stuck. And it is a form of perfectionism. So they tend to associate perfectionism with the people who do all the things, the people who are like you're talking about, who want that big picture thing. And they're checking off all the boxes and they say, you know what, doesn't matter because if I don't have the big picture, I can't do anything else. So I'm going to just have to force myself to get through and do each of these little parts. And they look at that as being a perfectionist. And there is some perfectionism with that. And there could be some detrimental perfectionism with some of that happens, especially if that person has the approach of, I have to do all the things and I have to do all the things perfectly. So they can never get moving forward. They can never put the product out there because each part of it is not to their standards that they're setting for themselves internally, and they're not receiving what other people might be telling them externally of, it doesn't have to be that good. It's okay. This part is great. And what you've come up with is awesome. Let's move forward. No. And they see that as perfectionism versus the perfectionist who is very much caught up in, if I do this and I put it out there, then you have the opportunity to judge what it is. And I'm scared you're not going to like what it is.
Or someone won't, just anybody.
Right. And helping, which is something that I think is so important for artists, and helping artists understand that. Like, to me, that's almost 101. If you're going to put art out there, let's be clear. Somebody's not going to like it. A lot of might not like it. In fact, to meet with the most success, it might be that 90% of people don't like it, but that just means you niched down to that 10% who may love it, and they may help you carry the momentum to get more mainstream acceptance in what you're doing. But that is a very hard concept for a lot of people to really wrap their brains around. And all they see is, I don't know, you're saying this, but 9 people said that this was horrible. Only 1 person said this was the best thing they've ever heard. And so they can get stuck. And then I would argue devaluing their product, devaluing their creativity, if they start trying to dilute that in a way to make it more accepted by more people. They don't like this and this and this, so I'm going to water it down and see if more people think it's better.
Sure. I'm going to start to just make it sound like Taylor Swift or somebody that everybody likes, which is, by the way, not true. Right? Like,
absolutely not true.
Right. The most popular people are for sure the most polarizing. But all my friends like this artist or whomever. And so, yeah, I'll water down what I'm doing to be safe.
Hmm.
to be safe, because
Right.
this is, or to be, I'll hear it framed as like, I'm going to be realistic, I'm going to be logical, I'm going to make something that I know is marketable because it's currently selling. And the reality from a business standpoint, if you want to get super logical about it, folks, is that your fans will be fans of underground music that no one's ever heard before. Therefore, you're better off doing something in a way that other people aren't currently doing it, so that there's room for you in the space. But I get it. I get why that's considered more of a safe space. And it's interesting to hear, like, from a psychological standpoint, how that starts to happen, how that starts to unravel.
Yeah. And it's powerful. It's something that really is hard for artists to kind of move past. And I'm sure you see this where it impacts people in so many different areas. If they're trying to get the most perfect take on the mic, what does perfect mean?
It's the worst.
Right.
The
Right.
perfect
Like
take
you
and the attempt to get the perfect take is like the worst singing anyone's ever recorded. Yeah, it's the
and
worst.
and and you're saying that, as an artist who's working with them, and I'm looking at it as a psychologist saying, when you talk to me about who you love as an artist, it's not their perfection that you love. It's not the perfectionism that you're resonating with. It's those other things. It's those little imperfections that's what you're remembering and that's what you're enjoying. If it's perfect, it's sanitized. And sanitized is kind of the opposite of creativity. So
Yeah, it's not human.
you're getting lost in the weeds here trying to be
Yeah.
perfect.
I always say, to my vocalist in particular, your job is not to impress someone's brain with your technical ability. It's to move someone's heart. It's to make, the hair on someone's arms stand up. And that's going to happen when you are beautifully unfiltered. And yeah, there's a certain amount of training that will go into you being able to be raw and unfiltered and also in tune, because sure, it will be distracting to us if you are
Mm-hmm.
singing out of tune. But beyond that, you do not need to be pitch perfect. You absolutely do not need to be technically flawless. And it creates a very self-centered, self-protective, self-serving performance or recording, which is not very generous at all when you're trying to make art. Yeah.
Yeah. And I see part of my job to help people ahead of time with that is to get them to understand, why are they doing that? What's happening? What is going on? And, I will tell them, I think it goes back so deep and so far. And I think it goes to early childhood. Children are little fearless. They don't have that. They will stand up and belt completely out of tune and expect everybody in the room to look around and say, that was amazing. Because in their hearts, there's like, I'm just having fun. I'm sharing this. This is great. And somewhere along the line, we keep putting parameters on it and we make those parameters get tighter and tighter and tighter. So you start with a kid and you say, okay, I want everybody in the room to take this box of crayons and I want you to draw a picture of a flower. And you're going to get everything under the sun from those children if you're talking about 3-year-olds. And one may be just a bunch of scribbles on a page. And if you take the time to say to them, like, well, what is this? Explain this to me. Not any judgment, just explain it to me. Well, you said draw a picture of a flower, and that's what this is what a flower makes me feel. Because they didn't even hear a parameter of, oh, I was supposed to draw what the flower looks like to me. You just said draw a flower, and that is a very broad statement. But if what happens is one by one we say, oh, I meant for you to say to put one what it looks like. Oh, okay, that's one parameter. And they put what they think it looks like. And you say, oof, that's great, but you didn't put any petals on it. So that's another parameter. And we keep getting these parameters and parameters where it's like this very narrow thing now. And what happens is some kids are going to be very good at those parameters, and some are not going to be very good at those parameters. And as opposed to just saying, well, I don't fit in those parameters, they say, I'm not good at drawing. I'm not good at being creative. I'm not good at these things. So when I'm talking to people about how do you not do that, it's like, remind yourself, what are the parameters you're putting on yourself that are stopping you from really stepping into your brilliance with your creativity? Are you setting artificial parameters on that?
Oh, I hate to open up this can of worms. It's going to be a can of worms, a Pandora's box, and a good old Mel Mulligan soapbox moment. Okay, this is making me think of music education, this is make me think of music education. And I don't think you and I have ever really talked about this, about music makers, innovators, those who do not fit in to the parameters of what a school band, school orchestra, choir, technical, like the classical or even musical theater vocal coaching, right? They want to make different sounds. You know, they experience classical or musical theater singing. And listen, I'm classically trained. I did musical theater. This is not a dig at that. I went another way, ultimately, with more contemporary music. This is not a dig at people who fundamentally love and value those academic pursuits. But let's be real. There are so many creative music makers for whom those sonic sounds are ugly. They are not desirable, and they don't feel they are effective means of self-expression. And when you are a gifted musical child, that's often what's available to you, right? In a public school system, or even sometimes in private lessons, that is just what is available. And how many of us, myself included, believe we are not good at singing, or we are not good at music because we don't read sheet music, or didn't in my case at the time, right? Because we're not drawn to playing sheet music, because we're not drawn to that music, we're told we're not good at it, or we'll never be a professional at it, when really some of the most gifted musicians just play by ear. They hear a Beatles song or a Beyonce or Coldplay or whatever, and they can just sit down and play it and belt it out. And no one knows what to do with these kids. And it just, oh, it more than breaks my heart now. I'm like the verge of furious over it all the time, because these are bona fide artists, right? In every shape of the word.
And the most creative in so many instances.
Right.
And if they haven't had this training that, yes, of course, there's a very positive side to it. My children were all trained, so to speak. They were afforded, they had the opportunity to be in lessons and all of that. But at the same time, if you don't have that, if nobody told you these are the rules, then the amount of creativity you get to have. If you haven't been told you have to interpret the sheet music exactly as it is written on the page, then you get to hear the song and add your own nuance to it if you choose to do that. You get to think of it in a very, very different way. You get to say, oh, I didn't realize it was supposed to be in that key. I've always, when I played it in this key, it's a little easier because I'm not formally trained on the piano, but I taught myself how to play in the piano, and this is how I am able to do it. It's so interesting how people don't realize that there's that balance, that there's parameters and there's reasons to have the rules and the parameters. But if we aren't encouraging people to also, not just encouraging, embracing those that break them, then we have people who, going back to what we first talked about, can feel really paralyzed. They can feel marginalized, of course, but they can also feel paralyzed. Because if you take that kid you're talking about, and so let's say I have one child, or let's say teen. So I have a teen who was trained in all the things, and they're great. They're very talented. They are very accomplished. They like what they're doing. And you say to them, I need you to write a song. They may look at you and say, I'm a bad songwriter. I can do all these other things, but 100%. I am not able to do a song. I cannot songwrite. Even though if I looked at on paper of the list of things they had in place, the tools in their toolbox, I would say, well, you should be able to do this. And then you have the person who's had no training, none of that exposure, and just writes from a place of abandon and with no sense of what their parameters are supposed to be or what's right or wrong, and they say, sure. And they jump in and they're able to come up with something unbelievably creative and innovative and interesting and fascinating. It's something that we're losing by not honoring that and teaching, as you're talking about, like the music education system, teaching students that part of it's okay as well.
Yeah. And knowing, and this will take time. And this is, I feel like maybe another mission in my life that I need to figure out how to implement is I want to help train, music educators on how to develop how to develop and work with those who approach music in that way, because they deserve guidance and validation and perspective. Is this great? Like, it's great that I'm this creative. I got it. I'm gifted. But like, is it great? How could I get better? You would love an artist who is that creative to be able to speak the language with other people. That's something that I try and impart on my outside of the box artists. Well, let's face it, that's like all of my artists. Those are my people. But, it's totally, totally fine if I say, do you know what key that's in? And they say no. And I'm like, okay, let me show you how to put that in Logic and figure it out, so that when you're collaborating with a guitarist who does speak in that way, you can say, well, it's in C sharp, but, we can drop it down a half step. You can play it in C. We can, like, it shouldn't be that training and education kill your drive, kill your creativity, or make you feel less than, ever. And I know that that's shifting and changing for sure. But man, I just think that there's so much more that we could be doing to unleash the creativity in our artists.
And I want to flip that too. I also want to say that if you do speak the language, being comfortable with the idea that there's other languages out there, and it's okay to explore those other languages. You can do this in another way, and it's okay. Don't worry about that. Just be in the moment. I was talking with a musician who was really struggling with the idea of songwriting. And one of the things talking about those parameters is I said, have you ever tried to write a song using a non-American scale? And they were like, no, never occurred to me. It's like, why don't you just try to write a tune using a different scale? Pick a different scale. Pick a different culture scale, whether it's Japanese or Persian or Indian, whatever. Pick that and just try to write a tune and see how that feels. And they did it without hesitation. Why? They had no expectations of being good at that scale. They didn't know what the rules were of how you're supposed to modulate from this note to this note within the scale, but this note to this note, we consider that to be dissonant. They had none of that. And it was an easy way to kind of say, see, when you take away some of the parameters that you're not even realizing you have as parameters, you were able to just be free because you weren't worried about it being right. You weren't worried about perfectionism. You were able to just dive into creativity with no concern. It's like, that's taking you back to that childhood thing where, sure, I'll try. That was your attitude because what the heck? There's no right or wrong. There's no judgment.
I love that. So this is like almost full circle about different ways to try and show up as your best self, right? To try and tap back in. What I'm getting from you is that we all need to just become 3 years old in our space.
Yes, we do.
I was talking to Joyce Trotniak, who's our editor in chief, and a really talented recording artist here at Chartless. And I was telling her how I'm taking an online guitar class right now with Tim Pierce. Shout out to Tim. Don't know him personally. Love his guitar modules. They're very cool. But I was telling her about it, and I said, I haven't really advanced as a guitarist in a very long time and wanted to get back into it. And she said, I've always wanted to hear you do something in like different tunings, like other than standard tuning. And I said, yeah, I don't know what the heck to do with it because I don't know. Suddenly my memorization of what notes I'm playing and what chords and where they are on the grid goes away. And so I get stuck. And she was like, well, that's not how you do it. Like it actually gets rid of that linear thinking because everything's all sort of, jumbled up and not memorized in your head. And then and I was like, oh, wait a minute. Do you just move your hand around until something sounds cool? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, I have not done that on a guitar since I was 17 and just learning it. I was like, oh.
Exactly. Yes.
That's how you do it. She's like, yeah, I don't even know. She's like, my brain isn't thinking about the names of the notes or what chords. It just sounds good. And I was like, oh, got it. And she's like, yeah, that's my assignment. That's my guitar lesson for you. And I was like, oh, wow, I still haven't done it. I'm a little nervous.
But if we take away expectation,
yeah,
that's where the creativity can come from. When there's no expectation. And you can't see that your effort is flawed. There is no right or wrong. When you go to do it, you're saying you're nervous, but you're nervous probably because there's a little bit of you that's going to say, what if I get it wrong? What if it doesn't
Yeah.
sound good?
I run, a coaching program called Music Career Mastermind.
Mastermind.
How could I suck at guitar alone on my couch in my apartment? That's just that's just unacceptable.
But if you can step out of your way
Yeah.
and say, I have no expectations or parameters on this, I'm going to approach this with a beginner's mind. Such an important thing to, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to actually do it in practice, which is I have to take away any sense of perfectionism, of right or wrong. I have to just be open to doing what you did the first time you picked up a guitar, which was probably just placing your fingers somewhere and strumming and saying, that didn't sound quite as horrible as the last one I did. Maybe that's an actual thing. And you just had fun with it and you played around and you did it. And I think that this takes us into this, when again, I'm working with people around this and they say, well, why have I have such a hard time doing that? It's like, well, if you do that, you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable to outside judgment, your own judgment, to just not sounding the way you want to sound. And when you open the door to vulnerability, you open the door to potential for shame. And no one likes to feel shame. Everybody tries to avoid it. So the easiest way to avoid shame is to go right back to those parameters. But I know the rules over here and I'm going to work within the rules. Very hard to hold that and be creative at the same time.
So I have a serious question for you that I don't think I've ever asked you before. When artists are working with me, of any age, really, there's a little bit of this inherent results-based pressure on both of us. They're like, I'm setting aside this time and I'm making this investment in coaching and a program and I need structure, so I know I'm getting things done. And I definitely feel like, yes, I need for you to enjoy the journey and feel safe and supported and have a holistically beautiful experience, but also we should be getting some things done, right? How do we both, like, what advice do you have for me as well as for the artist? Like, how do I create that space so that, yes, we're going to get things done, but we're going to do it through this like beginner's mindset and, creative freedom. How do I set that tone and allow my artists to be in that space?
What I have personally found has worked when I've been working with people to help them try to do that is to set benchmarks. Benchmarks are fine. We need to accomplish this. But from getting from here to here, have total freedom within that. The beginner's mindset is between these two. Yes, we know we have a direction we're trying to head. There is a benchmark. How we're getting there, we need to be open to doing that in all sorts of different ways. And setting, which I know you do brilliantly, but setting a space for people that says, and all ways are accepted. There is no wrong way. Nobody's going to tell you that is the wrong way. You may. For example, to your point of it's important for some people to know the language simply because it expands who they can work with and communicate with and collaborate with. But even if they know the language, if you can say, that's not actually how most people do that in Logic. And I'm going to tell you how most people do it. However, that's brilliant. I love that.
Right.
And that's okay. Like, it's okay that you're doing this in a way, and that's actually not what that is supposed to be used for. That's supposed to be used for an entirely different thing, but you didn't know. So you did it, came up with this cool sound, and it's an amazing sound. And I'm going to tell you this with no shame. I'm telling you not to shame you. I'm not telling you to correct you. I'm not telling you to now try to go do it in the place you're supposed to do that particular effect. I am telling you so that when you are communicating with somebody else, you have the language to let them know, this is how I did it. And I like it. I'm going to stick with it. And the goal is to get to a product. So if the goal is a product, how we get there, I'm going to let you know there's no wrong way to get there.
Yeah. And also maybe setting that expectation up front of there will be trial and error. There will be trial and error.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It can definitely be sticky, especially for everyone, there are some initial things that I usually ask, artists when I first start working with them to do for me, explain some of your goals or, do a brain dump around how you see yourself as an artist and things like that. And I've had artists just want to refine their answers to those questions forever and ever and ever before they move on. And I've had to say, I'm no longer finding this exercise to be serving you. Like, I no longer feel like this is that important, you know? And I've had others just shut down, not be able to do it. The question itself is just not serving them, you know? And I've had to really try very, very hard to make sure that, you know, my students understand this is not school. You actually can skip assignments. We actually can do them out of order. These are prompts. And if the prompts are pulling out nothing or pulling out maybe, you know, all sorts of negative self-talk, then we try another prompt. I have other prompts in my back pocket. This was just like the first prompt that I tried, but I've got others.
Well, and I like to I remind my own children who are all three, two are committed musicians and one's, I think, pretty heavily on his way to it. When they get stuck with that idea of what you're talking about, or kind of what is your brand? It's not just your artistic identity. What's going to be your brand? And they are savvy. These young people are savvy. They understand, ooh, to market myself, that can be part of what needs to happen. They understand that. I have said to them, you're right. And it's good to know what your identity is and what you want to write from and what you're trying to evoke and who you want to be, your people. But at the same time, I want you to look at some of your favorite artists, especially some of your favorite artists who are over 50. And please tell me if the stuff that they wrote that you can find when they were 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 sounds the same as when they were 30, sounds the same as when they were 50. You don't have to stick with one thing. So give me your general answer now, and that's good enough. And it'll change, it'll morph, and it'll refine, and we'll change it over time. And there is no shame in that. You don't have to have it all figured out the first time Mel says, I want you to answer a few questions about what your artist's identity is. And it's also okay if you say, I don't really know.
Well, yeah, for sure. And just to clarify, I never ask an artist, what's your artist identity? I ask them I ask them questions about very specific things, about what type of drum sounds do you think you like? Or, you know, like we're in the weeds. And I never use the word brand ever. I hate that word.
I didn't think you would ever use the word brand. I think that they jump to that. In their minds, they start jumping to that. And it's like, yes. Stop. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that.
And so I love that you brought that up because I never say it. But what will come back to me often is, I don't know how to answer those questions because I don't know what my brand is. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, we should not be branding. We should not be branding a bakery when we haven't decided yet if we're making cupcakes or cookies or scones or, you know what I mean? And we've never actually made a full dozen of anything. You know, we're not making commercials right now. You know, we're actually having fun in the kitchen right this very
And it's okay if you come to me and say, I've never tasted a scone. I don't even know what a scone is.
Yes.
It's okay. Like, that's what I want you to say. So I can say, great, guess what? We're going to spend some time learning about scones and tasting scones. And it's okay if you hate scones, because there's a whole lot of other things this bakery puts out there, and that's fine. That goes back to that vulnerability. I think that sometimes artists have a hard time saying, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. And especially as they start to make their way, as they hit an age where they're working with more experienced artists and they see people who can just spit out all of this stuff. And I know this, and scones, well, it depends if you use this flour or use this flour, or if it's, you know, this or this. And they're going, see, that can be a really complicated thing for them.
Yes.
And learning to say, it's okay. It's okay. Take a step back. And that person who knows all about scones is actually jealous of the fact that you get to try them for the first time.
So to recap, everything I talk about always comes back to cupcakes and now scones. Okay, so to recap, part of learning to show up as your best self is to have that beginner's mindset. Think of the 3-year-old drawing how a flower makes them feel, and then also potentially working with coaches or mentors to maybe, or parents or friends or, you know, guides in your life to unpack maybe where the blocks are and why. Like, let's get into the details rather than just the generalized overwhelm. I absolutely love it. I'm going to call this part 1 with Dr. Alaina Johnson, because we're going to come back and we're going to dive in on some other topics again very soon. But Alaina, you are the best. Thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows where to find you on parenting talent and how to get in touch with you, because your resources and your knowledge and your respect for artists is just top notch. I love you.
Well, thank you so much. And I love you as well. And I can't wait to do it again and keep the conversation going.